Well, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to International Flavor. I am Samuel Trapp and I am reporting to you from the city of Kazan, Russia. Well, Republic of Tatarstan, country of Russia. I'm here as a member of the news media, attending the BRICS conference, which took place yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Tomorrow will be the wrap-up session. There will be a press conference with Vladimir Putin afterward. I hope to be able to attend, but it looks like I'll probably be in a gallery somewhere because I'm not one of the chosen large media folks, which are already well picked way in advance. And I'm frankly just lucky to be here. I'm glad to be here. I think this is a historic moment, and I am all my plan is today, and I'll give you a full report on what I learned from BRICS when I'm done learning it. I'll give you some taste of what we had. There's a BRICS pay system that they've unveiled ideas for and showed a card for, but they haven't given any total details yet for that system. And I'm very much interested in that. Very much interested in interbank pay. They have created a new development bank, and that has been ongoing. Next year, Brazil takes the chairmanship. I'd love to go next year to the Brazil conference. I like Brazil anyway. I assume it'll be in Rio, but who knows? But it'd be very nice to go there and do this all over again. Might have to learn some Portuguese by then, but I'd still find it very useful to go. It is late at night, and right now, and if you're watching this on my YouTube channel, thank you. I am putting this out on my YouTube channel as well. For those of you that like to listen and watch, you'll see me I'm in my pajamas, and I'm actually laying in a bed doing this. It's late at night here, but I want to make sure I get it done so that it uploads. We have a little bit of trouble with the live shows here. I don't have the technology all wrapped up for that, but we're working on that, and someday we'll get it figured out where I can broadcast from anywhere, because I'd love to keep on doing it this way. I'll figure it out. And I met a lot of people here at this conference that are doing similar things with bigger news agencies and bigger things like that. It's been a lot of fun. And I'm just a smaller time radio host, hoping to hit the big time and do some of those things. That'd be a lot of fun, although I don't necessarily care. I do like giving my opinion, and I'm going to do it anyway from wherever I feel like doing it. So it'd be nice if I could make some money doing it, huh? How about that? But at any rate, that is not the story of today. I wanted to give my impressions of this conference from a lot of different perspectives. Like I said, the theme of the conference is going to be important. I'll get in there and tell you about that. But I've talked about this enough so you all know, if you've paid any attention to me at all, where I'm coming from with this. I was actually interviewed a number of times by media from other countries. And I want to tell you a little bit about that, just about what happened through here, because to me it's very interesting. And the only reason to tell you of it, well, not the only reason, but another reason to tell you of it is because it's indicative of why BRICS is so relevant currently, and how other countries see it developing, and why right now, at this period in history, it seems to be so critical to what the rest of the world is thinking. If you've paid any attention to me at all over the last couple of months, you'll know that a lot of my thought process in this comes from countries like India, from countries like Brazil, from even from China and Russia. It's coming from, but countries that, but especially India, I would say. And I went out of my way to watch a meeting of the Indian foreign minister today. It was conducted in English. Everything else has been conducted in Russian, which I enjoy. But in the English speaking room, nobody was in there. It was me and a bunch of Indians, but it was conducted in English. There was one other. There aren't very many Americans here. I ran into a couple of people from the New York Times today. They're very nice. I heard that allegedly there's NBC is here. I didn't see anything. And there's a few bloggers here that are well-known names that sadly I don't know. One of them I recognize, but I couldn't tell it to you off the top of my head. And I haven't run into him yet. Somebody said they were going to introduce me to him because I had never spoken to him, and that'd be really nice. But I came here to get firsthand information about what they are planning in BRICS. But they've still been, in my view, a little bit secretive about what they're actually doing. Now, I went through several weeks ago on this program, I went through all of the plenary meetings that were going on over the past year that Russia, 10 months now, that Russia has been hosting or presiding over BRICS this year. And next year they'll do the same thing in Brazil. All their plenary meetings will be taking place. There's been things like accreditization of universities in BRICS countries. There's been development of women's issues. There's a lot of focus on global warming and how to deal with it. There's a lot of focus on issues of the developing South. But some of the biggest ones, they have to do with justice and fair payment systems. And India has been talking about the inequity in the UN structure for years. I remember first hearing about it 10, 12 years ago, but it's actually been maybe longer than that. They surpassed China as the largest country by population. And China and India combined represent a huge portion of the total population of the planet. Very importantly, they resolved they didn't resolve the border dispute they have. They still have border disputes from that they've had that have been ongoing for years. And there was actually armed conflict and I believe some deaths that occurred in 2020 during this time. And they had meetings on the sidelines that took place in Kazan and, in relation to the BRICS conference, but not part of BRICS. And they chose to basically keep the status quo, but not let that conflict interfere with where they are trying to go and develop a structure for the countries to work together and as part of a larger global economy scale. And that was important, that this armed conflict and this long held strife between these two countries about this border isn't going to be enough to destroy them. There was talk about Pakistan having a desire, but that they wouldn't be And I heard this on the sidelines, so I can't tell whether it was an actual discussion that was had in plenary session, but it was certainly discussed by other people that were at the session that Pakistan and India have problems, and that Pakistan is in conflict with BRICS countries, and so therefore there would have to be something to deal with those sorts of conflicts before you can go forward. Now remember, part of the reason for this BRICS conference was every year, but this year in particular. Last year they added another 5 members, and there was a total of 38. I heard some numbers, and even more besides that that want in, that actually participated. Turkey was invited and arrived yesterday, I believe, and had side meetings of trying to be a part of the system, and they are trying to create rules to expand the structure of BRICS without and to get rid of world strife. You have to get rid of these points before you can invite someone else to be, before someone is invited to be a member. These military conflicts between countries of BRICS are just not going to be part of what they want. And there's another, like I said, alleged 38 countries in total that were going to be here and have participated in these sessions. And there will be a final report. They've given us some pretty good information, and there's screens everywhere with different subgroups meeting, and so there's a lot of information to get that they've been passing along to us, and interviews going on everywhere. It was a lot of fun to be there. And so I want to give you my first, what I thought it was important was on the Brazil side. There, I met a guy from Brazil, and he had some very interesting comments. He has traveled in the East Asian countries and lived in Russia and East Asian countries for, in his words, 20 to 30 years. He's traveled and lived there, but he originally is from Brazil. And he was very interesting to talk to, and I hoped to get a complete interview of him, but it just never worked out. Both of us were running like madmen today and talking to a lot of people, and I spotted him several times. Hopefully I can get a chance to speak with him tomorrow, because he's very interesting. But it come to find out, I was one of the somewhat popular. I had a number of interviews with a number of different stations, and I'll go through each one of those and tell you about it and the interesting thoughts on it. But the Brazil guy, each country has their own set of thought processes and how it goes. In America, we're so far not invited, and we are, according to them, the problem. And I'll tell you a little bit about where that go. But I asked him, where do you see the guy from Brazil? I said, where do you see this organization in 10 years? And he is, by the way, these are just there were a lot of political commentators and political radio show hosts, or whatever you want to call it, political authors that write articles. And so while we were in these sessions, people were also gathering information and gathering ideas and talking to different people and discussing some of the things that we had learned, right? And he was very popular in that regard, and apparently he's been to quite a number of these, and is historically popular and an expert in these in the developing of what it is. He said one thing about Brazil. He goes, and remember, he is no longer living in Brazil. So this is what he said. He said, listen, Brazil's taking over next year. That's kind of funny. But, the Brazilians, they are disorganized and they can't run a hot dog stand. He said, we'll see what happens next year, but it's not going to be like Russia, and it's not going to be like it was in China. Those were very professional and very fantastic events, and I hope to attend next year when it's in Brazil as well. Me personally, and he said he was going to be there too. And so it could be worthy of finding out what BRICS is and where it's going. He said, well, in 10 years, I see, he goes, they're building the structure to be an alternative world organization for everything that goes on in the UN as well. Very interesting. And he told me about his thoughts. I said, do you really think that the Brazil thing is that they can't manage this, and next year's event isn't going to be as professional and as nice as this one? This is a really nice event, and they've outdone themselves, in my opinion. You can say a lot about Vladimir Putin, but boy, you can put on a show. It's quite a show, and they really took care of it. From that perspective, and a lot of information. He said, well, that remains to be seen. He sort of kind of tongue-in-cheek, but he also meant some of it as well. And but he said he sees it in 10 years as being a competitive force to the UN, especially if the NATO and West, as you want to call them, continue to foment war everywhere, continue to foment conflict. That was a huge portion of the topics. And on the American side, we don't see it. And I'm not saying we don't. Some of us do, and a lot of people are very, very intelligent and know where we are seeing this, but and where I am going with that. I hope nobody takes it to mean I'm anti-U.S. I'm not. But we haven't been popular in our activities in the rest of the world for a long time. And the rest of the world talks about it. And they can't help but... It's not that they... The days of respecting the U.S. are gone. The Iranian president was quite blunt about it, and I'll get, he said the days of the single entity running the planet are over. He said those days are gone. They're behind us. And I heard that theme from a lot of political commentators. There was a guy from Iraq that said the same thing that I sat and chatted to for a while. He... in Russian, we had this conversation. He's an Iraqi, and I asked him about the Americans being forced out of Iraq next year. He told me that the Iraqis, that the public sentiment is really for the U.S. for the most part, but that he believes that some of the Iran, Saudi Arabia, some of the conflict in the Middle East is forcing that hand. And that's my point when you say these things about changing the West conflict. And people look at us worldwide, from what I've seen so far, worldwide as people that create conflict and don't accept other people's ways of lives, as if we have a means to control them or need to control them. And by that I mean the Clintons, the Obamas, people of that ilk that just think that, geez, why isn't there... Remember, they used to make stories about, and this was either a pretend theme, make the world Britain. That's whether that was for real or just something you see in Pirates of the Caribbean, when they truly thought, that you should, make the world Britain. We're trying to make the world America, and the rest of the world doesn't want to be America. They want to take the good things about America and leave what they think are the bad things about America. And I don't. The bad things about America, I got my share of things that I disagree with, but I don't think America's a bad country, and most people don't think America's a bad country, and there's a lot of people that still want to live and immigrate to America. But they also are realistic about the fact that from a political perspective and from our government structure and from what we have done, we ignore our own country and force ourselves and our military industrial complex down the throats of the rest of the world. That's the way a lot of people see it, and I can't say that I blame them, having been around and seen it. I mean, even the guy from Iraq that I was chatting with said that it's a shame that we go everywhere and we have to stay forever, and that we have to put military bases everywhere. And the only way you get to keep these military bases is you claim there's some form of democracy, but who gets to pick that? I don't know. It's I don't think Iraq is any more democratic than it was before the Gulf War I or Gulf II. But I'm no expert on Iraq. Trust me on that one. But even according to what this guy said, that they're still, everybody's got their own political issues. And that's where the story of BRICS is going to be the most felt. Because the structure they're trying to build, and the reason they paused applications, which are numerous, last year there was 97 countries that wanted to be in BRICS, or were inquiring about becoming members of BRICS. There's a definite 38 in attendance at this summit in one way or fashion. World leaders, the 10 were here. The guy from Brazil was by video conference. He fell and hit his head, and the doctors told him not to travel, but I watched his presentation, and he was live by video link and participated in that way. And so a lot of information and knowledge on this, where it came from. I asked the people from, I got interviewed by 2 or 3 different Russian stations and channels. That was entertaining, especially in Russian. And that was for them somewhat different. We spoke about the popular question with everyone that I talked to is, who's going to win? Is it Trump or is it Harris? Well, I am not a Harris fan at all. Harris-Biden, I think, has been a terrible combination, especially for the world. Haven't done the U.S. any favors either. And my failure to support Trump the way that I probably would doesn't have to do so much with policy, because his policies I like, but from a personal perspective, I always got so pissy when I'd watch him focusing on stuff that, in my view, didn't matter. You know how you say, if you're going to beat up and call people idiots and call people stupid and you're going to do things like that, you don't have much of an argument. You need to focus on constructive criticism to get rid of him. He's never been very constructive, in my opinion. He's much better this time than he was in 2016. In 2020, he got a little better, but now he's more seasoned, maybe seasons, or he's learned some lessons. Do I respect his ability to take a punch? Oh, yes. That's probably the biggest thing I love about that guy. I make the joke, everybody sees my name, especially over here, and my name, Trump, sounds like Trump to a lot of people. Oh, Trap, that's just like Trump. Well, no, it's not, but I get it. And but I make the jokes and say, "Yep, I'm just like Trump," which in some ways I feel like it. I'm always fighting, for what things that I probably shouldn't be fighting over. But I don't have any money. So I'm Trump without the money. And it'd be nice to, maybe I'd prefer to have the money and not the other things about him. I'm not sure. Who knows? But anyway, that's a little bit of a sideline and a joke. But I have so many things to go through here from the I hope you listened to the show the other day. If you haven't, I think you can go back and listen. I know you can listen to it on my YouTube channel. You can go out back and listen to my show from Tuesday, because there were people interested in this that I actually met a couple of people who had watched it here, and they went back and they said that analysis of Blinken and his ridiculous take on where the world is right now, and the only reason it's ridiculous is because it does not mention BRICS at all. And this is a very important meeting. You can't just ignore something and hope it's going to go away. BRICS is not going away, people. They announced a BRICS pay system on an individual level, which kind of surprised me a little bit. I was thinking that they were looking for a settlement system, something similar to the SWIFT system, but they're really not. Well, they are, but that has been in the works and been discussed I listened to the banking system as a result of that, and how they're addressing some of those problems, and that was pretty interesting. But they've introduced a payment card which will work in whatever country the BRICS people accept it to be a part of. So you can tie your Visa to it in a Visa country. You can tie your Mir card to it in Russia. You can tie your Union Pay card to it in China or wherever else it's used. There are other places. And whatever the systems are, your American Express can be, things like that is what they're trying to achieve. And the individual payment system means something not necessarily to compete with Visa, MasterCard, American Express, whatever the payment system is, but to be an alternative to. Sanctions will not be. There was a lot of talk about the sanctions, and that, as part of the rules for entry, which they're allegedly going to put out, these rules. And the trouble is these things are all in development. And just because you have a conference that goes on for 3 days doesn't mean they've all been resolved. They have not. And so it's there's so much information coming out about this that you need to be paying attention to the BRICS. And now I saw this online, and I actually got on and played with it, because in conjunction with the BRICS payment system, it's called BRICS Pay. You can check that out. And they've designed the card, and says details to follow later, basically, where they're working on the system for this payment processing system. Mir, Union Pay, other systems. And there's also a strong belief in blockchain types of currencies too, that can be tied to the BRICS Pay and can be used to settle transactions across countries through an individual basis, through a country basis. Now, the talk is that the system of payments between countries are going to be each country pays in their own currency and settles it with a national bank or whatever designated bank of the country is going to be. For Russia would settle with China in whatever currency they choose to transfer and the money would transfer through the BRICS payment system between the two countries, and with a level of exchange rate tied at a certain time each day, just like you do for other transactions, but not have to convert everything to dollars and then into something else through a SWIFT system, tie it to a SWIFT. They're copying some of the structure, but not some of the what they believe are arcane and lopsided rules of the United States and the West and the Western-dominated money. So they're working on it. This BRICS is not going away. And last year was the year that they allowed the 5 other countries in. This year they had another large group of countries coming in that all participated, and they haven't agreed to allow anybody else in yet. There's just the 10, but even just those 10 still represent they still represent 40% plus of the global gross domestic product and the global population. They're larger than NATO, larger than the European community and the Western countries combined. As far as the amount of trade are, so as far as population goes, they somewhat dwarf the Western economies as far as the size of the populations. So very interesting in where they went. In day one, there were meetings between all of the ministers and the presidents. They had an informal lunch for the BRICS leaders, a working lunch they called it, and talked about next year the summit being in Brazil and the presidency being taken over by Brazil. There was discussions about the countries that want in. Erdogan from Turkey showed up and had sideline meetings with a number of different leaders, certainly with Putin and with some of the others. Let's see if I can come up with the quote of the day, I thought, that came from the delegation from Turkey. The delegation of Turkey has accepted the participation in the BRICS summit at the very highest of levels to underscore our large interest in working together. We are sure that our cooperation will lead to further development of mutual profitability. And that was by their foreign minister. And the Russians on the same side said some of the same things. They are serious about it, which could be a big blow to NATO. Now, you could argue and say that, Turkey will never leave the U.S. or leave what's going on. India, where it's pretty clear that they don't have any intention of abandoning their ties in the West, but they're a founding member of the BRICS alliances. But they feel that the unipolar world is gone as well. So listening to the way they speak, I want to make sure I'm not just hearing things, and this is not being talked about enough in America. Let's see if I can read all my notes. The biggest developments of this year relate to the fact, and this is important, relate to the fact that BRICS is no longer concerned just with the member countries. And that's important. When the U.S. has a structure with their group of four in the Southeast Asian area, or you have five companies or five countries working together for this particular goal or that particular goal. They have their goals already laid out. The BRICS world, whether the US believes it or the US accepts it or not, the rest of the world is beginning to see it as something not to compete with, not to have even an alternative to, but a companion or corresponding structure for justice and development. And that is exactly how they worded it. As I said, China and India were putting aside their disputes. These countries, many of them, and when you listened, and I listened to each one of them, the words of their leaders giving their speeches saying the world is in great conflict, and this conflict seems lopsided, unequal, unjust, unreasonable, dictated by one side, dictated by the same side, and a lot of times inequitably, meaning you'll allow one country to get away with one thing. To not get away with something, condemn them for doing something, most notably Russia for invading Ukraine, but then support another country in doing the exact same thing, Israel. And I'm not saying that it's good, bad, or indifferent. I'm saying that the rest of the world sees it as I don't know what, two-facedness. You create rules for me, but not for thee. The same thing that you would not want to happen in your workplace. The same thing you don't want to happen in your family. The same thing you wouldn't want to happen in your marriage or with your kids or in the Boy Scouts. You can't have rules for one set of kids, different rule for another set of kids. It just... And unfortunately, we have the reputation of having a different set of rules based upon who you are. And that's inside and outside of America, unfortunately. Everything having to do with the way we run things, it seems hard to be able to take people seriously when they have different sets of rules depending on the day that it comes out. So I believe those the words are important. India, when Modi was speaking, he said, the multicultural and multipolar world is far more important and is taking over the rest of the world. And he was very proud and adjusting their growth percent, saying India, and 7.5% growth in India this year. India is booming, and very positive thoughts. And then turned to Iran. Iran kind of made a bit of an attack on, of course, the United States. They were probably the most blunt that I heard. And everything is in Russian here, and I didn't miss it, but you're also hearing someone's translation of what was said from their native Arabic, I assume, and I'm 90% sure that's right, in Iran into Russian, and then me translating it for you into English. So it may not be exactly the same at all of these things I heard them in Russian as they were going on. Iran basically said pretty bluntly the unipolar world is at its end. The wars, the conflicts, and attacks of the United States against the rest of the world are crumbling, and there is a much wider cooperation that is going to be brought about, and we're here to support that. I'm not here to tell you truth, falsehood, indifference. I'm here to report what I heard. You can take what you want from it, because I'll tell you what the facts are, as far as I heard them. Whether you want to believe it's all propaganda or not, that's up to you. I can see the points on a lot of these things and hear, but this is what other people are saying. And they're pretty unified in it, which leads me to the conclusion that the United States and the Western countries' dominance, whether you like it or not, probably isn't going to go on forever. Nothing ever does, by the way. If that were the case, Rome would still be here. England would still be running us as a colony and things of that nature. I'm not saying that we should embrace the fact that we're not going to be the top dog for long, but we're not going to be the top dog forever. I don't know if this is it or isn't. I don't have any effect on it, but it's certainly worth considering that both Russia and China and India, for that matter now, have said that this is a far more serious effort at creating an alternative, not a competition with, but an alternative to the world order dominated by one side. Multipolarity, definitely a theme. And I mean, how do you not know that? I've been talking about that for months myself. Iran also said BRICS will become a stronger alternative and will be stronger going forward with growing countries and mainly in the global south, and taking into account other countries' ambitious goals, not for only the profit of the West. Now remember, Iran was, of course, if you want somebody to be negative about the U.S., they're it. And but then again, have you ever heard anything positive in our news at all about Iran? I'm not saying you should hear good, bad, or indifferent, but there's always, at least two sides to every story. They are trying to create. They're very excited. Iran is excited about something that doesn't require Western countries to control them with sanctions as well. Whether, admittedly, the countries facing the most sanctions are Russia, China, Iran. You could throw your North Korea in there too, but other people don't want to. There was a big theme among all 10 of the world leaders that we're talking about at United Arab Emirates. That person mentioned, their leader mentioned sanctions. Their leader mentioned creating an structure that recognizes the innovation of other countries. He also mentioned that the development of the world shouldn't be for the benefit of just one group of people, pointing directly at the West. If you want to know why people as rich as the UAE are interested in joining BRICS instead of the Western alternatives, well, that's exactly why. They feel like things have developed for the finances and the betterment of the West only for years. And so that is why they are a full member now as of last year, of the one of the new 5 to be entered in last year. So they're committed to these developments and creating a structure for other people to enter. The chairman of the Chinese, he said, Xi Jinping said that they're very committed to Brazil's leadership next year. They're very committed to the multipolar world. They're very committed to bringing in the global south. All of them said mirrored the terms. But she went a little further and said, when the West uses the dollar as a weapon against the rest of the world, then the rest of the world will sit up and take notice of that. Basically, they're saying that, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have to be here messing with this system if the U.S. and the West, well, it's just the U.S. really, played fairly. But they don't believe we play fairly. Not at all. The new development bank spoke about 35 to 40 new infrastructure projects that they have begun giving loans to the rest of the world. Tell you what, the alternatives are coming, people, and it's very, very interesting. I wanted to make a few notes about the Indian Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri. And there was someone else there too, the foreign minister and somebody else, economic minister of some sort, whose name I did not get to write down. He was not announced as having been there before, and this is one that was given in English. There were a few questions asked in there are several different languages in India, and I honestly am not sure which one it was. I know I didn't understand it, but it was asked and answered. They said not to, but they did it anyway. But most of the people in the room were Indian, so who am I to complain? And but I didn't know what the question was. But there were a good number of questions given out in English. They talked at first about the bilateral meetings to end the conflict, or at least keep the monitoring in place that's been going on since the conflict in 2020. Disengagement of hostilities, of course, and they haven't had any hostilities since 2020, but they've definitely been eyeballing each other across the border. Both of them claim a small section of property as their own, and that's been going on for years. And nobody has said anything about it for a number of years until fairly recently, when China claimed to take over the portion of it, and then there was armed conflict and a few deaths several years ago. But the press conference talked about the stability of the rest of the world being paramount and trying to eliminate these sorts of conflicts to show that they could keep the peace and not kill people, not kill each other over things that needed to be resolved by diplomacy. And these are important. I don't believe you hear enough of that from our country. They were very proud, both on the Chinese side and on the Indian side, that they have been able to de-escalate the tensions and have a patrolling and disengagement agreement between the two world leaders who dealt together on the sidelines of BRICS in order to resolve that, and gave authorities to various ministers to continue and follow up with each other in an effort to come to a creative agreement to resolve the issue, but continue to work together for financial stability and, more importantly, peace in the region and taking care of their own peoples without killing them all. These killings and killing regular people, people are sick of it. I'm assuming we're sick of it too. I know I am, and I wish that diplomacy was not dead, and it is. And over here, the fact that Biden hasn't picked up the phone and called or said something to try to work together with Putin or a minister or something from the very start of this, and instead you have people like Boris Johnson and Anthony Blinken, fanning the flames and making more war instead of less, both in Israel and in Ukraine, in Syria, plenty of places. And there was a lot of talk about these sorts of things. Nobody for or against, but certainly pro-peace and trying to get people to work together to resolve these conflicts without millions of deaths instead of fanning the flames of hate, distrust, and war. So, you can call me, I don't know what, a Putin apologist if you want to, but the rest of the world sees us as one of the largest threats that creates conflict everywhere we go. And I think that our foreign policy, especially the last 4 years, although arguably quite a bit longer, has been frowned upon by the rest of the world for a very long time. So I think that's important. She talked about having productive exchange on BRICS and so many different topics. He talked also about the women's development of women's issues, spoke specifically about global warming and efforts to combat that, talked about their own strong energy alternative production in the batteries industry, in the solar fields, in wind turbines, and all of these sorts of things. Some of the same stuff you'd hear at the UN level is my point. So everything you hear here, you're listening to in an alternative format, without it being controlled by the United States and the West. I don't know if that's right, wrong, or indifferent, but people in America, you should probably know about it because it will affect us at some point. What are we going to do? Go to war to stop it against, 1.3 billion Chinese and 1.4 something billion Indians? To tell them, no, you can't do that. You got to use the dollar. They don't want to. Why are they supporting our economy? And they talked at length, especially China, talked at length about the debt that is saddling the U.S. And I say again, they talked about, they're all selling U.S. debt. So the days of people funding our debt are disappearing. And if that doesn't scare you, it should. Get yourself a financial advisor and check that out. What happens? We're already either at or over our 100% going to pay of GDP equals debt. That's ridiculous. Russia's is 5%. There are a lot of countries with very low amounts, but the West, all of the Western countries are near the top of the debt structure. Huge amounts of debt in the West, funded by the rest of the world as far as the rest of the world is concerned. So, you know, you can get all the professors you want together from Western think tanks and have them tell you that this is a good thing for the Western economies, and it is if you can keep people doing it. But if you give somebody an alternative that helps them to grow their own currency by being paid in their own currency and not having to get paid in the dollar, and keep their money in certain ways and not get sanctioned, they're going to take it. And that's what's happening. All right. After the discussions on the border disputes between China and India in the press briefing that I participated in with the foreign minister of India, one of the questions was, are there going to be confidence building measures, and the military still going to be facing each other down there? And that is when the foreign minister said, no, we don't know exactly what that's going to be. We've given the instructions, the minister, or Modi and Xi Jinping have given instructions to the committees below, the military below, and that they're to resolve these things and come up with a plan between the two, but it was a global framework for resolving the peace and how to keep those disputes from affecting growth between the countries. So that's basically the world events that I heard today directly from them. Very well worth the time. Not a lot of detail, but all of the plenary sessions which are associated with it. Some were private, and most were private, in fact. And these were the parts at the end where they talked about it, but they have to do with the structure of bank payments payments between countries. They were all very set that it'll be in the country currencies themselves to keep the need to trade in other countries' currencies at a minimum. That should strike fear into the hearts of the U.S. financial system, because Anthony Blinken and company have ignored it for intentionally, like I said in my show a couple of days ago. So I wanted now to spend the rest of the show, we have another half an hour to go, with some of the interesting conversations I had to give you just a bit of perspective on where these conversations were coming from. My first interview, I wanted to get information on sitting with Russia Today, the ones that the U.S. Attorney General's office has been filing charges against in an effort to get their money. They're accusing them of money laundering. So they charge them with a scheme of trying to avoid sanctions, and that way they can seize their property in the United States. And they can take their personal property, they can take their bank property, they can take their lands and titles. And so you charge them with the crime, and then you throw in something having to do with money laundering, which is what they have done. And so I gave a review of those probably a month ago, so when those charges were first filed. So I thought, as a sideline to it, one of the things I would like to do while I was here was try to find a couple of RT people and speak with them. So I was speaking to some people from Indonesia, English speaking and Russian speaking, a very nice group of interpreters that were here interpreting for their respective leaders and teams. And we were discussing, where I was from and what I was doing. And I just said, man, I don't suppose you know anybody from RT. One of the girls worked in Moscow. I said, I don't suppose you know anybody working for RT. I'm trying to figure out a way to interview one of the RT people and get some further information on that. A lady had just sat down next to it, and she goes, I'm an editor at RT. What are you looking for? Oh my God. We sat down, we talked about it. I told her what I was looking for, said I had sent some information to RT several weeks ago and, hadn't heard anything back. And, she says, well, those emails are hard to get through. And she did an interview of me and said, we're going to send this off to them. I'll send it up the chain and see if people want to talk about it. You can tell me what you're talking about. So it was pretty funny and just totally off the wall. And so she was asking me about, what I was trying to get to, and I was explaining to her why I thought it was important. She went over my channel with me and my Russian channel on YouTube, where I speak in Russian, and she took all my information and she's going to pass it along to the people that be, so that perhaps I can get some interviews and see what their thought process is on this, from the not anybody's more from the channel perspective instead of the personal perspective of anybody that was had lawsuit filed against them. I've read some of the lawsuits, and government's always trying to take your money in the U.S. And if they can, charge you with a crime, they can take all the ill-gotten gains of that crime. And it's always my question: how do you know they're ill-gotten gains of that crime? If you were rich before, you can't just take it. Oh, well, of course, there's ways to get around that. You just claim that, if you've lost the benefits of all the gold you reaped from creating these schemes, then we can just take other property that you may have in the United States. So U.S., especially on the federal government side, always finds a way to get money. States do very well at that too, by the way. Missouri are experts at it. So the interviews that I spoke with the Russians, everybody wants to know. Everybody, every single one of these people I talked to wanted to know Trump or Harris. And everybody asked me that question. The guy from Brazil asked me that question. 90% of these people, or more, surprisingly, all for Harris. All of them say, well, geez, that Trump, he's just going to be a nightmare for the world. And I asked him specifically, is that because of U.S. news and things that you're listening to, or is that what you really believe? And I said, I believe that in America we only have two choices, and I think that's somewhat of a shame. Yes, you could argue that the lady from the Green Party or Kennedy from the Independents, that actually means something, but ours do not mean anything. And when Ross Perot ran, I can't remember if it was 92 or 2000, truthfully. I think it was 92, but I don't remember, I can't keep track of that. I remember thinking it would be nice if we had a third party. Well, it just seems that nobody in the world, in the U.S. world, is interested in that. Why isn't there the independent party? Something else. We've just never developed it that way. And part of me thinks that it's because the people with all the money want it that way. They already own all the Republicans. They already own all the Democrats. And if we had third parties come in, they will fight like hell to keep third parties down. Because, the more people, the more parties come in, the more you got to pay them off to hate each other. And we have the uniparty anyway, between the Democrats and Republicans, with some limited exceptions. You know, I don't believe that they're any different from each other just because they happen to have an R or a D at the end of their name. If you don't recall from your 10th grade civics class, Republicans are the ones that believe in a small federal government and greater states' rights, and the Democrats believe in the reverse. They want a huge central bloat. Of course, they're pretty good with the state-sized bloat too, because they like to, that's where they get their further bloat going up. And if you can just keep the bloat going, you can have the entire world run by a government, which has led us to where we are today. So if there were alternatives for us to pick from, I think it would be far better. But, who am I to change the world? Nobody. So if you listen to these people, though, they almost everybody was very much for Kamala Harris and not so much for Donald Trump. And they were surprised that I would think differently. I had a nice conversation with a guy from India who also speaks Russian, and we spoke. He asked me to speak in Russian. He said his English wasn't up to par. I thought his English was fine, but we spoke in Russian about his thoughts on Harris, his thoughts on. I asked him in particular about India, and he said, and he made sure to let me know that from his point of view also, that all the talk in India is about the multipolar versus the unipolar, and the fact that as the greatest country in the world with the largest population, they get really not a whole lot of representation or not a justiciable, not a just amount of attention at the UN and in the West, in the Western structure, in the unipolar side of the world. And he said that most people in India are very much anti that. The guy from Iraq I told you about was pretty pro-US. And he said a lot of people in his country are, but also against unipolar world. A lot of these people really like the U.S., want to travel there, like to travel, think the people are great, but they think our government is a joke. And our government isn't doing us any favors. The same thing that we say about the rest of the worlds and their governments, they say about us. Our government is no present to us. They take care of themselves, and a lot of these people see their own way. The Iraqi guy and the Indian guy, and even the two Russian guys were reluctant to talk to me on camera. And I thought that was probably one of the most interesting things. Everybody knows I'm always eager to talk and give my opinion. What are you going to do? Tell me it's not my opinion? What are you going to do? Tell me that somebody fed it to me? Nobody fed me my opinion. I read, I listened, I reviewed, I studied things that are of interest to me, and then I came to my own conclusion. And that's what I believe that everyone should do. Your conclusion may not be the same as mine, and you can convince me that I'm wrong. No problem. However, maybe that comes from the fact that we've had freedom of speech in the United States for as long as I can remember. Seems to be being limited some these social media jokers limiting what you can say, blocking your access on certain channels, doing things of that nature. I'm very much against. You don't have to agree with me. You don't even have to listen to me, but I'm allowed to say what I think is right and is my opinion. And our government is supposed to support that, and Kamala Harris does not. She truly doesn't. And most of the boneheads that are serving now, especially on the Democratic side, don't believe that. Anything that I say, hell, you could certainly count on Hillary Clinton to call it Russian disinformation. That Sam Trapp is the new laptop of Hunter Biden. I'm not trying to change the world. This just happens to be my opinion. I spoke with a gentleman from Cameroon. Now that surprised me a little bit. And I was like, what are you doing here? And he said that they were there with a delegation. And there were some governmental workers. By the way, the Iraqi and the Indian guys and the Cameroon guys were all from government television channels, most of which of those countries only have government-based television. But the Cameroon guys were very interesting to talk to. They were there, said that there's some talk in their country about exploring alternatives. Not a whole lot to add to anything, but they asked me about Trump and Harris. They said they didn't have much of an opinion either way, but and didn't think there was a whole lot of effect on what it would do to Cameroon. But that was an interesting conversation, to say the least. Had more Russians interview me about food and about my experiences in Russia, and a little bit about my thoughts on BRICS. And I, of course, asked them to come on camera, and they wouldn't. Because, people are a little more reluctant to give their opinion in other countries. And, heck, maybe I will be if something bad would come of this. I don't know what possibly could. I'm not saying anything crazy or out of the ordinary. It's just a different structure. It's very, it's a different political look at the world from my point of view. Let's see. I spoke with another a girl from Moscow, and she was kind of funny. And she was carrying around a picture of Vladimir Putin, a pretty big one. And she's carrying it around, and she came up to me, and she had heard me speak in English to somebody, I think to people from Indonesia. And she came up and said, where are you from? You speak English. And I said, yeah, but I speak Russian too. She said, oh, really? Can I interview you? And she wanted to interview me in Russian, and she had this picture of Putin. And she sets it on a stand, and she goes, look at this picture. She's supposed to have sent me this interview. If she does, I'm going to put it on my YouTube channel too. And she says, I want you to look at Putin. And she's like, I'm looking at Putin, viewing him, and she goes, you can ask him any question you want. You have to interview, you're interviewing Vladimir Putin, and you can ask him any question you want. And I said, well, here's my question for Vladimir Putin then. And she goes, oh, really? And I was like, yeah. And I gave the question for Vladimir Putin, said, well, Mr. Putin, what would you think if the United States offered to join BRICS? Would they be allowed in? And she goes, oh my God, that's a great question. Of course, not in English, but she said, that'd be a really great question. Maybe he'll allow you to say it. Well, tomorrow is the press conference. Frankly, I don't think I'm going to be in the room anyway. There's not enough room to fit everybody in. One of the press rooms in there. There's no way. And a lot of it is going to be seen on the video part. I'm assuming I'll be on the video part because, I'm not really anyone of consequence. But it'll be entertaining, and it would be entertaining to ask that question. But this isn't supposed to be a funny situation. It really hasn't been. It's just been extremely interesting, I think, for other people too. They asked me what my thoughts were on Chuk Chuk, which is a Tatar delight, kind of not really equivalent, but if I had to think of anything that it was similar to, it'd be like caramel corn, candy, caramel coated popcorn or whatever. It's not popcorn at all. It's a kind of a puffy treat coated with a sugary, sweet substance. It's not that I don't care for it. I don't do sweets a whole lot. I'm kind of selective. I like my dark chocolate from time to time, but I'm not a huge dessert eater. I do like some things, but I'm not really a candy eater. So anyway, but I do like the Belish, and if I'm saying them right, even Kistabui there were a bunch of Tatar foods that I really like, but I'll try most foods. I don't eat a lot of horse, and they do eat horse over here in Tatarstan. That I disagree. Not that I disagree with, but I've eaten it, but I don't like it. It's like when I lived in Qatar and I tried camel, but I didn't really care for that either. I've tried ostrich, didn't really care for that. So I was interviewed about food. That was kind of entertaining. And each one I tried to get to talk to me a little bit about the big events, and the big events have to do with multipolar world. And going from there. Who else did I talk to? Let's see. The Chinese people. I got interviewed by a Chinese group of Chinese journalists that wanted to talk to me about relationships between China and the United States, and why. One of the girls had lived in New York for a while and had said that there's never anything good in the news about relationships with China, and they want to know if American people, I suppose you look at me and you figure I'm just a regular guy, they want to know if regular people have any problem with Chinese people. I said, well, no, of course not. I don't believe that Chinese people have an instant hatred of America. I don't believe that of Russia. I don't believe it of China. I don't even believe it of Iran. I don't believe it of North Korea. I don't believe that. I think that people are basically decent people, and our governments, the U.S. is very good at this, of creating enemies that may not exist. I don't know. I try to keep an open mind about most of that stuff. And you hear a lot of people say, well, yeah, but other countries the U.S. isn't throwing journalists in jail. Yeah, but the U.S. isn't doing any favors for RT, or, they're whether you dislike what they're saying or not, and saying, disinformation, if you want something to affect an election, based on words that someone says, in my view, is claiming that, words matter. Okay? If someone wants to stand around and lie all day long, and you're stupid enough to believe it, enough so that you don't go get your own information from other sources before you pick a person to run to be the president of the United States, it's not on the person passing out the information. That's information on the foolish voter. And anybody who thinks that disinformation of any kind controls who a true American is voting for thinks that all Americans are just freaking stupid. And so anybody that claims disinformation is created and it should be a crime, believes that 90% of Americans are too stupid to know the difference. That's what freedom of speech is supposed to be all about. And so these claims against RT are just as bad as putting a foreign journalist in jail in a different country. So we're doing basically the same thing to journalists in the United States that they're doing elsewhere. Are we jailing them for it? We're trying to. The U.S. government is trying to jail. I mean, their goal is really the money at the end of the rainbow, because they think that RT is fun. Russia Today is funding these journalists to the 20 million, 30 million. They're throwing big money to have propaganda wars. But don't think, we have propaganda wars. What if somebody took Voice of America channels from anywhere and did the exact same thing on the other side? We'd be all up in arms. And a lot of people are, that they think we're throwing, Russia's throwing foreign journalists in jail. Well, what's the U.S. trying to do? And I'm not, I'm not the prosecutor. Prosecutor thinks he can make a crazy case like that. More power to him. But I'm on the jury. He's not gonna. That's nonsense. To say that, who are you to call something? Who gets to define disinformation of enough to affect an election anyway? Wherever it's coming from. You telling me that that's not what George Soros is doing? How much does he pay to affect an election by paying people to speak? It's rules for me, but not for thee, right? That's how it goes, or the other way around, however that goes. But the China ones were very interested in that. I had a very interesting conversation. Was in a Yandex, which is the Russian equivalent of Uber, and I was going to the session today. It's about a 20, 30 minute trip, and the Yandex guy was a talkative guy. Well, so am I. But he got to talking to me about the war in Ukraine. Wanted to know my thoughts on the war in Ukraine and how it got started. And he was a young guy. So he said that he had some friends that signed up. They're getting 2 million rubles, a lot of them, to sign a contract to go to war. And 2 million rubles is about the equivalent of, take 2 zeros off of that, and that will give you, instead of 6 zeros, it'll give you 4. So about 20 grand, and you add about 10% to that, they're getting about $22,000-$23,000, basically. A one-time payment is what they're getting. And he was asking me about my thoughts on the war, and some friends that he had go over. There was the first mobilization. He didn't know anybody that was in that, and that was in the very first start in 2022. But since then, there's been a great deal of people that sign up voluntarily. They're getting paid well to go. And he was asking me about our thoughts on that. And he asked if I'd served in the military. I told him I did. And I said, well, and he said he was very much against mobilization, and he felt that even some of the people that didn't have a choice, that the government had them by the short hairs and was sending them off to war, and a war for money, and their own personal money, U.S. money for Ukraine. It all had to do with money, and he was kind of against this. He says, people against war in general. And I said, well, the U.S. has had a draft in 50 years, but every young man has to register for the draft. There are exceptions. You can be a pacifist and get a conscientious objector status and then not go to war. And frankly, as a former military person, there are people who you wouldn't want holding a weapon, and if they were standing next to you in a war, you wouldn't want to be standing next to them, because you might as well not have anyone standing next to you. You'd probably be better off than somebody who didn't know what the hell they were doing and couldn't figure it out. And it is so scared, that takes a certain type of person to want to be a soldier, and there are certain people that can't do it. And so we were talking about Ukraine in specific, but when you equate it to yourself, I knew kids in basic training that they needed to be kicked out. And a couple of them got kicked out, and boy, they needed to go. They could not hack that type of lifestyle. So he said he understood that. Well, then he was asking me about money and, these people not having a choice. And I said, well, I'm going to give you my own personal experience. America, you have to pay for your own school. America, you want to go somewhere, you got to pay for school. I wanted to be a lawyer. I had to pay for school. But I didn't have any money. My family, big family, lots of kids. And knew my parents couldn't, help with that in any regard. And, I had 2 jobs and going to school. It was really kind of a painful situation. And I saw an ad on the television. It said, you could say, that these people signed a contract, and that contract they knew might require them to go to war. Here, at least they knew they were going to war before they signed the contract. In America, I knew there was a possibility I would go to war, and I knew I signed that contract, and I knew if war came about, I could end up there. But it was my choice, and no one was forcing me to sign that contract. It was my choice to sign that contract, and I signed it to get an $8,000 bonus, which I would only get if I learned the Russian language to a sufficient level to complete my job. And I did. And then when I re-enlisted, I got an additional, whatever it was, $23,000 to sign an additional contract for another period of years. And that is what allowed me to, and I got the GI Bill and all those things, and was able to use that money to assist in paying for going to college and then to law school. And so that was a choice. And if it ever came about that I had to go to war during that time period, and the Iraq war did break out, I did not have to go, of course. I was a Russian interpreter. But if war had broken out with Russia, of course, I would have been, sent away, and, just didn't, my choices were Arabic and Russian to get that 8,000 is what I remember. And I chose Russian, although I could have chosen either one. Anyway, those were the interesting conversations that I had with a number of different people at this event. It was very nice. Next week, I'm going to tell you about the events and what the PACE system, if they have one. There's supposed to be some announcements tomorrow, and the big exit of Putin. You can listen to some of that if you get the chance in Russian and in English on my YouTube channel at Samuel Trapp. And you can go, I appreciate if you listen to it. Check the schedule for Damn Radio at damnradio.com/schedule/hosts to get more information about anybody with a program. There's an app you can download at the iTunes Store, the Google App Store, Google Play Store, and you can download the Damn Radio app and listen to some really good music and some good talk radio. I hope you've appreciated my show and will join me again if you're watching me on YouTube and would like. I'd appreciate if you'd sign up for my channel and put likes and comments in the commentary. And I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you continue to listen to the show and to damradio.com. Thank you very, very much, and you have a very great day.